Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to CMI Race Moving the Dial. I'm Pavita Cooper. Firstly, huge apologies for the slight delay in our starting this afternoon. We had some technical issues. I'm really delighted this afternoon. I'm joined by a number of the CMI Race committee. With us this afternoon, we have Heather Melville, who chairs CMI Women, Tamara Box, Managing Partner, Europe and Middle East for Reed Smith, Aquila Lindo-Casello, Delivery Director at Cornell. We have Delroy Beverley, Managing Director, York Teaching Hospital, NHS Partnership. And finally, we're also joined by Amma Afrifa-Chie, who's Head of Culture and Wellbeing, Mental Health First Aid England. So welcome to all these amazing panelists. Thank you for being here this afternoon. Today, we're going to be discussing how managers can really make the difference in moving the dial on race and inclusion. And now more than ever, this is such a critical issue. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can use either the live chat box where we'll actually see the questions and we'll try and pick them up as we go through, or you'll see that there is a link to a live chat box which you can complete and you can send us questions at the end also. And you can find that link in a Google form if you want to add anything else. So I think what I'd like to do is kick off straight away and actually ask the panel about some of their own personal stories and perspectives about the whole issue of race in the workplace and what this has meant to them, and perhaps share something very personal about their own journey and story. So Heather, can I come to you first? What would you like to share with the audience that are here with us today?
Thanks, Pavita. I was thinking about this, and throughout my career, I've probably experienced some elements of racism, but I've been blind to it. But a time that I can tell you I wasn't blind to it was I was in Latvia on business with some colleagues, and we'd had a whole week in a business forum, and they'd gone to take me to dinner, including the chief exec of the Latvian Chamber of Commerce. And I was refused entry to the restaurant, and I couldn't understand why. And I was really saying to them, what's going on? What's going on? And it's not till we went to another restaurant, they said they'd refused to give you entry because you were black. I laughed at first, but then afterwards I felt quite sad. In fact, I was really upset. I can't tell you what went through my mind then. And I forgot about that. I parked that until this year. It came back to me with the whole George Floyd situation. And it came back to me because somebody reminded me of that situation. And that's when I realized that many people like myself, through our lived experience, these things happen all the time, but we park it and we forget about it. And I think that's the biggest thing that we've got to deal with here.
We minimize it, don't we, Heather? I think it just gets hidden under the surface. Thank you for sharing that, Heather. Delroy, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the important thing to say is I'm happy to have survived my career to get to this stage. And I think that's what we all are. We're survivors. Everybody's got a different story to tell, and every situation will have been different for each one of us. I think importantly for me, when I look back 100 years from where we've come from to where we are now, I think we've made significant steps. But I think the important thing for me is just how far we've got left to go. So rather than talking about personal experiences, I'm keen to really get across this afternoon about how far we've still got to go in this entire race, if we want to use that analogy.
Very, very good point. Aquila, let's come to you.
I think the challenges that I've faced have been more around me self-policing, if I'm honest with you, around the way that I look or speak, and how I fit in. For example, I was someone who would always wear a weave in my hair, and being a black woman, how to look a bit more European in the workplace is something that's quite common. But I think black hair has always been a thing in the workplace and in school. But I think there's a story around Izzy Flanders, who was banned from a school for his locks, if I remember. And then also, whilst I haven't been banned from the workplace, I think around, I prefer you with your afro hair, is something that I found that I had to overcome, and I found it was a challenge. So how I overcame that was I purposely started to wear my hair natural or in plaits, and I made sure that my business photograph that's on LinkedIn has me in afro hair, because actually that comment around I prefer you to have your hair in more European-like or weave is actually an insult, and I think it's micro insult if I'm not mistaken. So I think one of the things that I've made a conscious effort is when I get those opportunities to go into school, in the workplace, I use that example to educate my colleagues, educate the schools, making sure that when I educate my colleagues, educate myself in the school, and even refer people to things like, oh God, what was that movie? Nappily Ever After. The film that's on Netflix, Nappily Ever After, and the film around C.J. Walker, and just helping people to really understand, saying such a comment, which is actually my heritage. Afro hair is a part of who I am. It's how I look. It's a big thing. So I think for me, it's about trying to find ways that you can educate people around what is right and what's not right to say.
Thanks, Aquila. Emma, can we come to you? Aquila makes a really good point there about microaggressions. Could you share either for yourself an experience that's relevant, or perhaps if someone's come to you in the capacity of you as a line manager, how you've handled the issue of tackling microaggressions in the workplace?
Yes, sure. I think I can speak from both perspectives, really. I think throughout my careers, I've had different sort of elements of microaggressions, whether it's been complimented on how well I speak, seeming quite articulate and knowledgeable, almost to the point that I'm quite intellectual for a Black person or something like that. So that's been some. Definitely echo your points around hair. I've worn different facets of hairs, whether it's braids, twists, wig, whatever it is, and people are always thinking, oh my God, again, having comments and thinking that they have the right to invade my personal space around that, to touch my hair. So I've even had situations where I've been told that maybe it's not such a good idea that I sit with other Black colleagues because that gives an impression and not the right one. So I think from my perspective throughout my career, I can definitely share some anecdotes of my own experience, but equally the same, not just as a line manager, I guess in my role and what I do, a lot of people often do come to me to talk about and get advice on how to approach situations in the workplace from a well-being or culture perspective, where they're like, well, how do I handle the situation when I feel that somebody is saying something to me in the microaggressive way and they're not knowing it? And the advice that I always give is to have a conversation to actually let that person know, because it's not always the point that people know that what they're saying isn't necessarily appropriate or right until you call it out or mention it to them in a aggressive way. Because again, we have that label, right? If you approach something in a certain way, you become the aggressive Black female or Black male. So I often always acknowledge it, understand and try and understand what perspective that they're coming from and the experience they're coming from, how I can support that, and also within my role as a head of, how do I influence and navigate them through so that they don't hopefully experience that situation again.
Delroy, can I just come back to you? You made a really great point about we've still got a long way to go. Specifically, when it comes to line managers, what is it you observe that they get wrong in this area when they're trying to tackle these issues?
I think importantly, and I don't think it's about getting it wrong. I think quite often in the workplace, it's not about wrong or right. It's about what's acceptable. And is it acceptable to make assumptions because somebody doesn't look like you, or you've got a perception of that person's ability? And for me, that comes down to ensuring that managers and leaders and organizations create a critical mass around dialogue, being able to have dialogue about things that outside of work they may find uncomfortable, or outside of work they wouldn't normally interact with people who they may line manage or work with within the work. So for me, it's not about right or wrong. I think the other important thing is within organizations, what are we prepared to tolerate? So quite often, and I just listened to some other panel members articulate how they were made to feel about whether it's someone they sat and had lunch with, or whether how they did their hair. That's not a problem I have. I think the situation is about saying what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, and what is an organization prepared to do with regards to challenging those sort of inappropriate behaviors. So for me, it's still very much work in progress. I think it's better than it was 30 years ago. And I also think when we look back 30 years from now, it will be better than it is now.
Spot on, Delroy, as always. I mean, I love the point you're making about sort of, this is about the impact that we have in our wider circle outside the workplace. And June Sarpong refers to it as checking your circle. And I think that's something we need to be encouraging everyone to do. This is not just about how you show up in the workplace, it's how you show up in your society, your community, and understanding those lived experience of other people. Tamara, can we come to you? I mean, I have to say that you have, I think, been an exemplar ally in this space. You've been a long-time champion for equality in its broadest sense. And could you share with us what the experience has been like for you as a senior line manager when people come to you with these challenges or issues, or you observe inappropriate behaviour in the workplace? How have you handled it?
Sure, and thank you. And thanks for sharing all your experiences. They're frustrating. I mean, the reality is, I think we've got to be more overt about breaking down some of the myths. So for me, the myth of fit, do you fit in this organization? That's a constant in interviews and in discussions about performance. Merit, the myth of merit. Really, I don't believe we live in a meritocracy. We wouldn't be having these conversations and so many others if we did. So often in that role as a leader in your business, what you really need to challenge is, what is the business trying to achieve? Is the business trying to attract the best talent, be the best it can be? If so, then we have multiple examples of evidence that prove we need diversity for that. And diversity means you have to thrive on, love, and frankly, encourage difference. So that doesn't mean encouraging people to be the same. And my biggest frustration, and probably the way I try to best describe this, is we all work so hard at graduate level, for example, to get diversity into our businesses. We talk about all the progress we make, but we forget the part where what we actually did was then try to funnel them through the same little narrow fit or merit bucket. So we got the diversity at the wide end of the funnel, and then we move it into trying to be the same. So you took the one thing you sought to achieve and you ruined it. So you have to keep having the conversation. I think often about the drip on the rock that eventually erodes it away. We have to keep talking about, what are we trying to achieve? Not just diversity for diversity's sake, but opportunity, talent, all those things need to be shared equally. We know they're not. So how do we make our businesses better? We won't be perfect. And Delroy's right. I don't think even in 30 years we're going to have solved every problem. But I think we have to demand that we make some progress. And to do that, you have to have honest conversations about, what are you trying to progress?
Absolutely. Heather, can I come to you? We still have organisations that say to us, my company still has no diversity, which is bizarre. You think in 2020, even in the most remote parts of the UK, people still say that to us, when we know that it's not necessarily lack of talent, it's lack of opportunity. What would your advice be to the colleagues who are online now saying, well, that's my company, there isn't any diversity, they're not interested, no one's listening? What would you say to those colleagues online today?
So one of the things I think is important to talk about is that if organisations are not fishing in all the pools of talent, they're not being competitive. So ask yourself, is the organisation I'm working for truly leading the way in its field? So that's the first thing. The second thing is, okay, everyone says we don't have any talent today. I don't know where to find it. There are whole different excuses they'll give. But if we're going into a new marketplace, we will always find the right products and services and marketing program to get us into that place. So the starting place for me in any organization who says they haven't got any at the top is, look what you've got in your organization and look right now. Because whilst you are not looking, somebody else on the outside is looking in. And before you know it, that talented person you've got has been swooped from under your feet. And when they do that, they're taking other people with them. So for me, this is why it's really important that organizations realize this is not a side project. This is something that's very critical to your business. And especially now, I can't tell you the amount of young blacks, youngsters that have come to me and said they've been approached by this organization, that organization. If I'm honest, I've said to some of them, don't move yet. Don't move. Stay where you are right now. Use the best of this time So educate your organisation, work with them to get what you want. Because quite often these other organisations, I can't get my teeth in today, organisations will wheel them in, and once they've got them in, we've done that tick box. Now it doesn't really matter about them. We'll pay them a salary to keep them here for a while, but we want them to be happy. We want them to thrive. And the thing for me is around how are we successful, how are we attracting the best talent, how are we retaining the best talent, and how are we developing them. And there's a thing that always is at the top of my mind. It's equal opportunities of work, making sure that everybody has the same element of work for them to be thriving, for them to be successful. And we know that in professional services, that's what's needed. It's allocation of work that gives you the opportunity to be successful.
Absolutely. Daryl, you work for one of the biggest employers in the UK. And so what I'm interested in is, we know that in the NHS, for example, it's not that there aren't enough, there isn't BAME talent, it's just very much often at the lower levels of the organisation. What can companies and organisations do to ensure more proportional representation throughout their organisation, through the pipeline, all the way to the top? What would be your recommendations, and what would you advocate?
And thanks for the question, really, really important. I think it's everything that's been said and a little bit more. I think you've got to create a talent pool. So quite often people say that we want to attract more blacks onto the board, or more black specialist consultants. And my first question is, when you look at the organisation from outside looking in, would you say you're representative of the audience that, or the people that you're trying to attract? That's number one. What's the sort of language that you use in terms of your campaign? So quite often, and you've got to remember at these sort of levels, you're working with specialist headhunters. Well, if you're going to the same organizations, we're going to go to the same networks, we're going to put the same lists in front of you, you've got to have the confidence to push back and say, this is what we're looking for, and don't come back to us until you've got that list. I think sometimes we're often looking outside when actually we should be looking at the BAME talent that we've got within the organization. So how many opportunities are you creating for those, whether they're domestic staff, whether they're supervisors, whether they're managers? What sort of footpath are you creating for them to come through? Because quite often your own internal BAME employees can be your biggest advocates if you use them in the right way. I think finally for me, it's got to be more than a conversation. I love being on this call this afternoon, but actually it's meaningless if we leave this call and don't do anything with it. And I think this is now a call to action. So Heather talked about the George Floyd thing. On a personal level, I've been quite troubled by the number of organizations that are suddenly coming out and talking about putting money into research, etc., etc. But actually, this is not about putting money into research. This is about investing in a talent that exists that is not in your organization. I would rather see money go into attracting BAME candidates and talent into an organization than into research to look at why an organization doesn't have BAME employees. So it's all of the above. And for me, the final thing is, if you've got individuals who can be your champions, why wouldn't you use them? Why wouldn't we have them on calls like this? And I think, those are some of the things.
That's a great point, Delroy. Can I come to you? So if there are people on the call this afternoon that are thinking, I see a need for change in my organisation, but I want to be part of it, but I don't know where to start. What would you advocate to them in terms of encouraging them to say, how do you take a first step in your business?
So I believe the most powerful way as leaders or as an individual within a company is by speaking to.
Can you put your headphones on, because we're struggling? Your sound is intermittent.
Oh, really?
We
can you not hear
but
me
I think
now?
We've got some comments online saying that not everyone can hear you when you're speaking, and it's really important that we capture all the value of what you're saying. Try now, let's see if that works.
Right.
That's much better.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, much better. Okay. So I think the most powerful way that we can do is by talking to everyone within the business. Just to give an example, what that I'm doing within my company. So, you know, I've just been appointed chair of diversity and inclusion. Can you hear me okay? Yep, perfect. Okay, so I've just been appointed chair of diversity and inclusion. And one of the things that we did was, to orchestrate a conversation that was included everybody. So a company-wide meeting. I used what was called the appreciative inquiry model, the 4D model approach, which was discovery, dream, design, and deploy. And through that, we gathered everyone's thoughts and feelings, and people that were really wanting to champion how they were feeling and what they wanted to see the change, they came forward and talked about what they wanted to have happen. So it really became a staff-led projects team approach. It wasn't senior management level top down. It really was grassroots. So I would say that individuals, if there is something that you're passionate about and you want to take it forward, such as stakeholder engagement, policies, challenging the policies of the people, training, then please step up, be brave. Obviously, that it's difficult sometimes to say about being brave, but if we can create a safe space, but a brave space for each other, then and come together collaboratively, then that's where the changes will be. I think you will see that even the interlink between employee voice and also staff well-being will help and support the culture in the business. So my top tips, and I think I just wanted to go back to a tip that Ahmad mentioned as well, is if someone is being, showing microaggressions or saying things to you that are not nice, it's what do you mean by that, and then challenging it and then going to your HR department and saying, this is not right, this is happening, and I would like to be able to challenge it in a way that I support everybody within the workplace. Hopefully I've answered your question there, Pavita.
You have. Delroy, I know you want to come in.
Yeah, really, really, really important point. I'm just making sure that everybody can hear me okay. I think what you read, and Aquila makes the point so eloquently, this is about creating a critical mass around BAME colleagues, so colleagues don't feel alone. Organizations are more likely to listen to 500 employees than they are 5 employees. So quite often when you get onto whether it's equality and diversity groups or anything like that within organizations, the key trick is to create a critical mass around something that really matters to those audiences. Because once you've got so many people speaking to the organization en masse, the organization is likely to listen. So I'm just echoing the point that Aquila has made.
That's great. Anna, I'd like to come to you. We celebrated Mental Health Awareness Day on Saturday, and I was struck yesterday. I was having a conversation with a very seasoned senior executive. She's a NED on many boards. And I said to her, how have you been feeling, in the wake of all the activities over the summer, post George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement amplified here in the UK? And she said, Pavita, I can only describe it as I felt depressed. I felt very down about everything, about her own. It triggered for her own experience of growing up in the UK as someone who wasn't white. I think she felt quite disappointed or quite cynical to a degree about some of the responses of some of the large organisations coming out and when what she saw as virtue signalling response towards what's happened. I just wondered what your advice would be as a specialist organisation to both individuals who've been struggling through this period, but importantly, the role of leaders and organisations to support colleagues as they go through this and if they notice that people are having a hard time. What would your suggestions be?
I think it's a good point, Pavita, and I think some of the points that were raised here are actually, I echo and agree with all of them. I think but I think one of the key things also we need to consider here is the mental health and well-being of people of colour and Black people throughout this whole process. And especially if you're asking them to galvanize and also speak up and go in their masses to then say how they're feeling and share their lived experiences, and then nothing comes from it, or there's no support to signpost them to actually look after the mental health and well-being. As you know, you participated in one of our webinars a couple of weeks ago when we did look around and talk about how we support people of colour and Black people. And the key thing is for their white colleagues, whether you're a leader, a manager, a line manager, is actually the first point of understanding how to support them, acknowledging that this is an issue, and also understanding and learning the impacts that racism has on people's well-being. Anything to do with, to do with racism in the workplace, even outside of the workplace, it is quite crucial and impacts people's well-being. So the question then becomes, do you actually understand what racism is in its first place, and then the impacts that follow thereon? So there's a piece here very much around educating and understanding white privilege in this context, but also just privilege in general. And it's interesting because, Delroy, you mentioned stuff around zero tolerance, but if we kind of bring it back,
have we lost sound? I think we've lost you, Amma.
myself.
In your excitement, I love the passion.
But thanks for picking that, because I would never have known. But yeah, no, I think the key things, and I know that we're quite short on time, so I will wrap this up as soon as. But I think the key thing is, when it comes to, and our guidance offers this, is when you're thinking about mental health and well-being, when supporting the mental health and well-being of people of color and Black people, is actually understanding your white privilege, what does that mean? What is white fragility? The context within that. Understanding then how to then educate yourself around racism, race equity, and again, the impact on mental health and well-being there. Understanding that people are reliving traumas that they have constantly lived for years. And this year, coupled with COVID, has surmountably impacted that in some shape or form. So when you are doing your statements, or you're going out with your action points, and you're looking to your workforce, who are populated of majority of population of people of color and Black people, the onus is on you to understand and support how you can be a better ally, versus actually asking them, what do we want to do? Because the answers have always been there. And there's also a question around the dialogue, but also creating things and creating opportunities for people by asking them, and making decisions that impact people without asking them as well. So all of that comes into context. I hope that answers the question to some extent.
So I know you want to come in. I'm going to come to you. I mean, you raised some really important points there, and you use terminology that I think we on this panel may be used to, but I think others will be asking, how do I learn more? So you talked about white privilege, broader privilege, white fragility, a number of issues. If colleagues on the line wanted to find out more, where would you guide them to go away and learn more about this? Because I know there'll be people saying, I want to understand that in more detail.
Sure. So I mentioned we launched a guidance around how to support white people of color and Black people in the workplace. A lot of the stuff that I've referenced here, you can find a bit more out. There's things around white privilege. Is a great reading point is, and I'm picking The Invisible Knapsack by Peggy McIntosh. She talks a lot around white privilege and understanding what that is, and also stating that the fact of privilege is where you don't have to think about your identity impacting any area of your life. It's likely that you have privilege there. So that's a few starting points. There's lots of podcasts, just Googling white privilege, that comes up with some great sessions and some great TED Talks around that too.
Brilliant. And I've seen Matt's just put on a link to our CMI Race documents as well, so people can access that. Heather and Tamara, I'm going to come to you in a moment on sponsorship and mentoring, but before then, Nicola, I know you wanted to come in.
Yeah, no, it literally was just to quickly mention, because obviously Amma had mentioned about being triggered, and I think for me it was about, yes, you can look to your colleagues of people of color, but I think there's something about educating yourself. So I'm glad that you just referenced some books there and some guidance, because the ownership is around people. If you have white privilege, that the fact that the first thing is being recognizing that it has been afforded to you, but there's other different types of privileges that are out there, like colorism, caste systems, and class. And then when you know this, about acknowledging that, and then asking yourself, what can you do differently to help others? But I think there's something about, when you want to understand about race and white fragility and white privilege, go in and actually researching for yourself, not just looking to your colleagues within the workplace. And you've just shared a good book, so thank you.
Now, I just wanted to quickly add on that privilege point, whilst I did reference white privilege, because we're talking about it in context. I wholeheartedly agree. I think when you're talking about privilege is a deep reflection of yourself. And so the question then becomes, how good are you at identifying a lack of awareness of your own privilege to understand where inequality lies? And then once you are aware of that, what are you going to do with that privilege you have to make a change and difference?
Well, you're so articulate on this, Emma. I think we'll be getting you to do a podcast for the rest of us on it because you're fantastic. So thank you. And we do have a CMI Race toolkit that will be launching over the next few weeks. So do keep a lookout for that. It's coming soon. Right, to the powerhouses that are Tamara and Heather. So ladies, we have been on the journey on gender for 10 years together. We've learned a lot of stuff about what works and what doesn't work on that sort of campaign. And one of which was we knew that women were very heavily over mentored and under sponsored. And lo and behold, we understand the same issue happens on the subject of race. So, Tamara, let's come to you first. You know, what are your points of guidance and advice to colleagues on the line who are thinking about either for themselves or for their organisations how they address this issue of one versus the other?
Yeah, and I think first you have to understand what one is versus the other. And, you know, mentorship, it's sort of your agony aunt. It's the person you lean on, get advice from. You can be fully authentic and, you know, kind of cry on shoulders, etc. That's mentorship, and that's great, and we all need them. And those can be in the workplace. They can be your personal board of advisors. I encourage everyone to have that, by the way.
Sorry,
sponsorship
say more
is
about
very
that. What does
different.
the personal board of advisors look like so people know?
Well, it's really thinking, you know, in it's sort of back to the circle. In your circle, who are the people that you can go to? And, you know, look, just like you wouldn't expect any one person to have all the characteristics you aspire to, you need a board of advisors to cover off all the different things that you might have aspirations about or want to know. So it's never going to be one mentor as somehow the be all end all. So I would definitely encourage that. And again, your board of advisors might not be in your workplace. They may even be cross industry. They may be, you know, people you choose from your personal life, but who have something to offer you that helps you think about, you know, how do I want to approach my career? Sponsorship's a very different thing. And, you know, I very much think of sponsorship in the context of investment. You know, it's a co-investment, right? These are two people who are investing in each other. It's a two-way street, and there's a return in both directions. And I say that very purposefully because I think, you know, sometimes we think we can create sponsorship, and you can't make somebody, you know, put their money where their mouth is, right? The reality is this has to kind of come. And it's why I think it's so important that we focus on it. When sponsorship occurs, it's the person that will speak for you when you're not in the room. And they don't do it just because they think you're fantastic. They obviously will think that, but they do it because it's also going to add to their kudos, to their power, whatever you want to think of that as. Makes them look good when they're right about a pick on talent, when they're right about, you know, someone who can do a job. You know, that is a leadership trait. So you're adding to their leadership qualities. They're adding to your opportunity, right? So this is very much that two-way street. And you're so right, Pavita. I mean, the reality is, just like everything else, sponsorship tends to flow from, you know, sort of fit to fit, right? You sponsor people who look like you, who remind you of you. When you think about, you know, who's the next me, funnily enough, they tend to look like you. So what we have to do is not just talk about sponsorship openly and understand how important it is, but we have to create the role models, create the sponsors that can then pull everyone through. They're not naturally there. So our job is not create, you know, reverse mentorship programs and hope that turns into sponsorship, or create, you know, sponsorship programs where we think we match people up, because you have to be able to say, actually, this organically flows in the context of that power exchange, right? In the context of that co-investment. To get there, you need people who understand that, you know, those they are looking at who may not look like them, you know, can and will be that return for them. Can and will pull them into those senior roles. You know, can and will add to the power base, and they will, you know, they will be the ones to lift you up. But I genuinely think we have to really tackle this with intention, because it is not, you know, we've done so many mentorship programs out there. There's a million, and, you know, you all will be offered more. There will be more that will come through to deal with every aspect of diversity, because we know that mentorship is important. But to get to real sponsorship is going to take us trying to say, actually, we have to recognize this reflection in our leadership of what our talent looks like, reflection in our leadership that then can see themselves in those that they sponsor, and those out there that can see themselves in their leaders. And, you know, until we can get both of those sides of that equation working, it's going to be a struggle.
Very, very well said. Tamara. Heather, what have been your experiences around the way in which organizations handle mentoring versus sponsorship? And you know, you're someone who's been very successful, and I just wonder, was there someone critical in your career who had an impact, and you can look back and say there was a pivotal moment where someone intervened and it helped you?
So I have to say I have been quite lucky, but I've had to work 10 times harder than I feel than some of my colleagues. I've been fortunate that maybe I've done something that's been over and above my job. I've done things outside of work that have got people noticing me, and actually then they think, do you know something? I'm going to sponsor this lady because I can see we're not giving her the opportunity in our organization, but I can see what she's doing outside and how powerful it is. Now, you don't know who your sponsor is because, as Tamara said before, somebody sees something in you that you don't even see in yourself. You'll find yourself doing something or being pulled onto something that you had no idea about. So how do I get here? Well, actually, someone sponsored you into that role, and they will be making sure quietly you've got the support infrastructure around you so that you're successful. So this is nothing new, right? This is what's happened to men for hundreds of years. Okay, they've not got an idea, and I've got many male colleagues who've told me this. I had no idea about this job, didn't even know if I could even do it, but somebody somewhere sponsored me, and they put a support infrastructure around me, whether it be the PA they gave them, whether it be the admin person, or it was their CFO. They put a support infrastructure around them so that they would be successful. And what we're asking for in today's world is I want the same for every other person. Not everybody can be sponsored, otherwise that distracts from what a sponsor's about. But what we definitely need is when you can see talent, and make sure you're seeing talent through different eyes. I mentioned at the very beginning around the accessibility to equal opportunities. You can only be sponsored if you're doing one of those high profile projects that get you noticed. If you're still in the weeds doing all the digging, which is quite often where they put women and sometimes ethnic minorities, and particularly people who don't speak up a lot, people make an assumption that if you don't speak up in meetings all the time, you're not trampling to get over everybody, that you're not good at doing your job. And we need to stop that. As leaders, we need to pull out the quiet person and say, actually, what you've got to say is really important. What's your voice on that? Give them the space, create the space that they can have a voice. And I think I've got sponsors even to this day. And they're people who are my trusted circle as well. I never make any decision about my career without having a conversation with them, because it's important to me. Sometimes I don't like what they tell me, and sometimes I just have to suck it up, because at the end of the day, I know they've got my interest at heart. They will understand what my challenges are as a Black person. So right now, I've had the most difficult year that I could ever have experienced in my whole life. And then on top of that comes the isolation from COVID-19. Right over that comes Black Lives Matter. So we've got everything around us. So that makes me special, shall I say, not different, but special. And that's what I say to some of our, our Black colleagues, particularly our Black men who haven't reached out to get support for mental health awareness. You need it. And do you know why you need it? It's not that there's anything wrong with you mentally, but emotionally, we have been through something that has never happened in history before. And it's really important that we get the support, particularly our Black men who are faced with the everyday racism in everything that they do. And actually, I spoke to one young man the other day who said to me, he lost 4 family members, and he's put his mask on and coming to work. He's coming to work, he gets stopped by the police. Where is all that angst going? Actually, that's the sort of thing, as leaders, we need to create a space, just as we would if someone broke their foot at work. You would make sure they could get through the building, they could use the lift, all of those things are available. Organizations that really care about this, not the ones that put the sticky plaster on, because there's a lot of that at the moment, which is let's put the sticky plaster on so we look good. We'll take it off when this is all finished because they think it's going to blow over. Well, actually, it's not. If you don't deal with the root cause right now, here and now, we have an opportunity in history to really move things in a positive direction. So my whole thing is, a sponsor is someone who's got your back wherever you are. Wherever I work, my sponsors are always there in the background, making sure that I am supported. And whether it's a personal matter or whether it's a work matter, I can ask them what it is I need to ask them. And that's what we really want. And if you become a sponsor, make sure that you start thinking about the people that you can sponsor to help them on their journey.
Thank you. Delroy, before I come to you, I'm just going to remind everyone on the call today, two things. One is there's lots of questions about the difference between mentor and sponsor. So I think what we'll do is I will ask the CMI team to make sure that we can put some reference material on our website so you can access it and you can read about it. The second thing is I'm sure we're going to come back to you, those on the call, to say what questions do you have. You've got this amazing opportunity with these outstanding panelists. You can ask some questions directly through me, so please start getting your comments in the comments section. Please start asking your questions. So Delroy, I know you've been trying to come in for some time. Over to you.
Thank you very much. And I've got to say I was really moved by Heather's passion. And I feel I want to also stick up for men as well. I think this year for me has been difficult for one reason: 8 minutes and 46 seconds, which actually has been a lifetime of having a knee on our neck. And I think what's really important, and Heather talked about, I think you used the phrase that men have been doing this for years. It's really important that we recognize that that has been different for Black men. Really, really important. Really important that the whole world had to watch for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, or to realize that for all of our lives, we have had someone's knee on our neck. We're not good enough for this. We don't fit in here. Not this time. Maybe next time there was a better candidate than you. I think what's been important for me this year, suddenly everyone has woken up to the challenges that people of color are experiencing. So really support everything that Heather has said, but it's also important to realize we've had the knee on our neck for most of our lifetime.
Delroy, that was very powerfully put, thank you, and a very stark reminder of what was a very, very difficult moment in history, but I think has created a zeitgeist moment. So let's hope that everyone steps forward to be counted and make a change. And I'd like to come to you. So whilst we're capturing questions in the background, one of the most difficult things around this issue that comes up time and time again is how we talk about the issue of race. So when we did our research 3 years ago at the CMI Race, we identified the biggest issue was the silence around how people even get into a conversation and talk about it. What would your advice be to leaders, perhaps people who are not leaders of colour, saying, you know, I don't know how to talk to my team about this? Where would they start?
I think you start wherever as you start with most things, you do some background research first to, I guess, upskill your knowledge. So coming back to the point I mentioned earlier, do you actually even understand what race and racism means? Do you understand the impact, the historical context of that? And then, you start there for obviously doing your own education. But I think there's coming back to, as a leader, what do I then do? Lots of leaders are afraid of if I say the wrong thing, but to some extent, I also think that's an excuse not to actually have it discussed in the conversation, because I'm always of the view that if you say the wrong thing, people will happily correct you or put you on the right path in some shape or form. And also, if you say it with obviously no intent of malice, people can see that. They can obviously see the difference between covert and overt discrimination or racism, for want of a better word. So I think my advice to leaders and managers is, to just acknowledge the fact you're about to get uncomfortable with dealing with the situation and just get over it and get on with it in a really kind of, even though that sounds quite harsh, but it's quite direct. And then have the conversation and ask the question. Say, look, you know, whether it's to your peers, your direct reports. You know, you can create safe spaces where you want to have listening sessions. You know, Akila talked about it. We've all talked about giving opportunities for voices of people of color. So I keep hearing myself in the background. I don't know if it's my laptop but giving the opportunity for people of color and Black people to have their experiences and their voices heard. So, you know, setting those safe spaces where there is psychological safety for those individuals and those colleagues to be able to share that moment, and then also for you to ask questions and approach those questions with compassionate empathy and professional empathy, compassionate curiosity, but professional empathy. So you step in a place of leadership where you are empathizing with the individual by listening, acknowledging, and trying to understand that experience. At the same time, you need to do the work on your side to think about, okay, again, where is my privilege in this and how do I need to change to then be able to better support and understand these individuals, whether it's my peers, my direct reports, or colleagues. I then think there's something further around then actually thinking about the action sets of what you are going to deliver. You know, it's really interesting when we talk about influence and power and how much people are willing to give up once they realize that they need to. So then the conversation becomes, as an ally, how am I going to give up my influence and power to help amplify and put people of color and Black people in a different lens and perspective? How do I empower them? How do I give them that opportunity? And you start by asking, you start by listening, acknowledging, asking, and then putting in the places that, you know, putting in the steps to change. Now, you don't have to do this on your own. That's another thing a lot of leaders feel that they need to do. They have to kind of suddenly step up and work up in silos. No, you can do this as a collective. You learn a lot more from each other. You support each other through your peers, but you fundamentally have to commit to making that change. And that first change is acknowledging, I'm going to get uncomfortable with this. I need to get over this because there's a better and a greater good at the end that I need to change. And it starts with me as a leader to role model that and to be an ally, a proactive ally 24/7, 365 days a year.
You raise a good point on allyship. Tamara, can I come to you on that as someone who I think demonstrates what being a good ally means? Can you say a bit about how you go about thinking about your role as an ally and what you purposefully do every single day to practice that habit?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think Amma was, really eloquent on it. Listening is the first thing. Now, a lot of what I thought Amma was describing is also really good leadership. Listen, empathize, understand what motivates people. How can you help them be their best? How can you make room in your organization for them to be their best? I think most of allyship should come naturally to leaders. Sadly, it hasn't. And again, I think that's about recognizing that, being willing to hear your colleagues when they say, as Heather keeps saying, look, reality is talent is distributed very equally. Opportunities simply are not. And so your job as a leader, must be to try to equalize the opportunity equation. And in doing so, be a good ally. And again, I think that ought to be kind of fundamental. Certainly, I know we think it ought to be fundamental to how you manage. It ought to be fundamental to how you lead.
We've got some questions starting to come through. We had a really interesting question from Jesvir, who said, how diverse is the CMI as an organisation? From what I can see, there are a few BAME members of staff in senior positions at CMI. What's your view on this? So I might take that one, Jesvir, and say that actually, yes, I'd agree that I think despite the fact that CMI is totally committed to the progression of all minority groups, both in businesses across the UK, but also in its own institution, this has not been something that's been easy to address. So there is better representation lower in the organisation, and they're actively working on it. But I think the symbol of all of us here on the call today, as we are part of the CMI Race Advisory Group, Heather chairs CMI Women. I think what the team at CMI have tried to do is to think about how can they ensure that they can bring in expertise and a diverse skill set and thoughts from a wider group externally, because they recognise that. So, Heather, do you want to add to that?
I did actually. It's quite important, but it's a small point. So when I was being interviewed, not just for the chair of CMI, but to actually go on the board of trustees, the president at the time, we had a very strong conversation and very open, and he said, look, given the people who are members of CMI, I have no Black representation on my board. I have nobody that understands the journey of entrepreneur, female entrepreneurs. And so that happens to be you. You happen to be a Black woman. And I have to tell you, that was my deciding factor of coming to work for them. And I think that's probably what will keep me there for quite a while. There was that openness at the top and the ability to be open and honest and direct about what they wanted, and me to be honest about what I wanted. So there are organizations out there that really are trying to do something. They can't do it all at the same time. So we'll be kidding ourselves if you think that within the next year, every FTSE 100 is going to have a Black person on their board. It's just not going to happen, right? Because you need movement for that to happen. But what you do need is the pipeline. We need people having those conversations here and now. We need the talent watchers, the headhunters, to be out there looking in the different places. And this is my plug for the Power List. I have to say that, because the Power List has the most influential Black people, top 100 on this. So when people tell me they don't know where to look, I always throw them over a copy or point them to the Power List, because that's not an excuse anymore. But also, I think somebody mentioned earlier on, you have talent in your own organization. We have a young man that works in the organization I have done, who's just raised 6.4 million, I believe, for colleagues in Beirut, for their families in Beirut, or quite a junior person. Now, to me, that is somebody that shows resilience, that shows strength of character, that shows leadership. So what we need to be doing as organizations is not just saying, well, they haven't got that qualification, they haven't got that qualification, or they haven't been in the firm for 20 years. That's the latest. They want to be in the firm for 20 years before you're considered. Well, actually, no, you want someone who's driven, who's dynamic, who gets things done. And if they can do it in their own time, my God, what will they do in your organization where there is a sponsor behind them and a group of people that want them to be successful? I'll rest my case.
Thank you. So in the last couple of minutes, I'm going to ask a question, the same question of all of you, and just give you 30 or 40 seconds just back with your response before we close out. And that's on the issue of COVID-19. So there are many conversations about the challenges of COVID and the downsides and what it's meant, and the positives tend to be focused on the kind of pivoting of the future of work, and the fact that the world of work will never be the same. And 2030 has arrived in 2020. And it isn't coming back anytime soon. So I want to ask you, in the kind of wider space of equality and making the world a better place for everyone, what do you see have been the possible benefits of COVID? How has it maybe amplified or helped reinforce some of the messages, the work that we are doing as campaigners in this space? Or what, if anything, do you think colleagues on the line today could be doing and thinking about? How can you use COVID to leverage improving your workplace? So, Kula, why don't we come to you first? Can't hear. Are you on mute? I can't hear you. Oh, yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? I think everything that everyone has said today, I think it's about educating ourselves. I think COVID-19 has given us this opportunity to educate ourselves on what is happening in our communities, what is happening in the workplace. I think that, the topics around race and having those open discussions have allowed us to the time to redigest what's happened. So I think for me, it's about, use this opportunity where, people are being made redundant and are being put on furlough to educate, because apprenticeship can still happen whilst you're on furlough. So, that time to educate yourself, use that time. And seek out your allies that, like Emma said, and your colleagues who you collaboratively can work with. There's something around finding out what other organizations are doing about equality, diversity, inclusion, and seeing how you can share best practice. So I think we have the time to do that, especially given the climate that we're in at the moment.
I love that.
We have the time to learn.
Challenge to all of you, a time to learn from Aquila. Delroy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, just very quickly, it's been a game changer, because what COVID-19 has done, in the stroke of a pen, it has created a global platform where we can sit like this in a room, speak to 400 or 500 people, and engage in a completely different way. So from my perspective, it's taking all of the benefits that this new digital platform has created to break down some of those barriers that people have consciously and subconsciously put in the way of being able to attract Black talent into their organisations. 29 seconds, Chair.
Well done. Very good. Very impressed. You win the prize so far. Emma, over to you.
I'll try and beat that. I think for me, COVID-19 has done, it's almost like a gift of having to put race and mental health and well-being both on the map simultaneously at the same time. And for me, it's about changing the narrative and continuing to change the narrative. So the voices that are talking, sharing, giving those experiences, making those decisions that are put in places of influence and power are equally from diverse ethnic backgrounds as well. So yeah, I would say for me that the fact that it's shone a spotlight, and I hope the spotlight does not go away. We have a lot of work to do to continue to change the narrative. And I think my takeaway piece to everybody is to make, now you can't go forward without having to think about it from both the lens of inclusion as well as a lens of well-being. And how does that impact others and your behavior, and what can you influence and change within your small worlds and big places too.
Yeah, they are entwined. Thank you, Emma. Tamara, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's hard to improve on any of that. We're a global organization, and I think had we had the George Floyd murder and the Black Lives Matter movement occur in the absence of COVID, it would have been really easy to silo how we talked about it, how we dealt with it in our organizations. We would have had our conversations in our offices with each other. Instead, what we, I think, have created is exactly as Delroy described, this global platform. So, you know, I've had folks in my US business, you know, having town hall meetings with my Brussels teams, you know, Paris getting on the line and with Germany and also with Asia and the US and talking, you know, what does this mean in the context of our geographies? How do we handle things? What is it, you know, what does it mean for our organization? How do we address it in the context of our values? That became something we did as a global collective organizationally. And I don't think we're alone. You know, I was on a panel this morning with a few managing partners in law firms talking about, you know, what's happened in COVID and how do we create connectivity. As I said at the time, in some ways, the Black Lives Matter movement and George Floyd was a little blessing in that it gave us this connection point, this need to be together, to want to talk about something, you know, really authentic and, you know, personal with our colleagues. It created culture, it created values. And I think that's what we got. And we wouldn't have had it had they not happened, you know, in a coincidence together.
That's a great point. Thank you. Heather, the last 30 seconds to you. You're on mute, Heather.
Taking me off now? Hi.
Great.
Right. Speed of change and transformation. No one can ever tell me we can't do anything anymore. When anyone wants to work flexibly, no, there's no excuses, because guess what? In a moment's drop of a hat, all these organizations that did not open the doors, did not make flexible working available for their staff, did not have the technology, all of that stuff are now having the most successful time ever. They've given back the gift of time to their employees, who've continued to give back to them value and trust and loyalty. And if that's something that's come out of COVID, those, as well as humanity, those things have all come into place. We've got no excuse now. So there is no time to take no from anybody, but to show how within a matter of moments, we can organize ourselves to do something that we've never done before. So in my mind, we can organize ourselves to become more focused on creating a more equitable environment where everybody has a voice at the table. There's no more excuses about we've got no money to get any funding to put this program in place. Just do it, because you had to do it for COVID.
Heather, thank you. So I would like to thank all of you who have taken the time to join us for this afternoon session. It's great to see so many people join. We've got some great comments in the comment section saying that you found it very helpful. I know that there are more questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of you. We will try and roll those up and respond to them on our website. So keep a lookout for that. And I'd like to say a very personal thank you to all the panelists. These are very senior, busy people, and they've given up their time this afternoon for this really important issue and continue to support it. So you don't see all the work they do behind the scenes also. So a huge thank you to all of you, and we look forward to all of you joining us for future sessions. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.